The doors of the Twin City Opera House opened to the public in 1892, but the building really had its beginnings several years earlier. In the mid-1800s, Morgan County was flourishing. By 1850, the population had grown to nearly 30,000, about double what it is today. Present-day ghost towns like Santoy and Rossaw still bustled with activity. Several railroad lines crisscrossed the county. Riverboats moved freight, commodities, and people along the Muskingum. Showboats made regular visits to the banks of the river. McConnelsville was a vibrant county seat and, along with neighboring Malta, housed dozens of prosperous businesses. Mills, factories, hotels, restaurants, and retailers of every description provided ready employment and the chance for an urbane lifestyle. Morgan County residents had a desire for leisure pursuits and for more cultured forms of entertainment. By the end of the 1880s, a majority of the McConnelsville Council thought the town needed a more suitable place to house the village government. So, a controversial and prolonged process of building a new town hall began. It was a politically charged issue. While the Republican mayor and the Republican council members were opposed to building the town hall and opera house, the Democrats supported it. For nearly a year, the council was in a stalemate. In October 1889, the council's Democrat president, acting for the mayor in his absence, called for a vote. Without the mayor's vote, the tie was broken, and the committee was approved. A month later, the Morgan County courts upheld the legality of the appointment. The building committee for the town hall and opera house was comprised of George Donahue, Worley Adams, and W.C. Conklin. A second issue that had to be resolved was the securing of a suitable location for a structure as significant as the town hall for the county seat. As it happened, an ideal spot was available. It was in the very heart of McConnelsville, in what the newspapers called the Burned District. In 1889, the town council initiated a series of transactions through which they ultimately acquired lots 31 and 32 on the northwest corner of the public square. They immediately recommended proceedings to condemn enough of the Burned District to construct a town hall. The property was purchased for $4,000. In reporting on the story, the Republican editor of the McConnelsville Herald declared that the property was only worth half that amount. Local residents and visitors to the Twin City Opera House have long wondered what stood in that burned district. Stories have persisted that the spot was once occupied by a hotel called the Brewster. An exhaustive search of real estate records reveals no such entry. No references to a Brewster Hotel are found in any county business almanac or atlas. No account of a fire in a Brewster Hotel can be found in any of the newspapers. Even though photographs or engravings depicting all of the other three corners of the square exist, none of the northwest corner has been located. Strangely, very little information exists about what occupied this prominent spot. The McConnelsville Council employed H.C. Lindsay, an architect from Zanesville, to prepare plans for the new town hall and opera house. The building was to be 3 stories high and cost about $16,000. The town hall would have a tower that would rise 108 feet above the sidewalks of McConnelsville. The 3rd floor would feature a grand ballroom running the complete 63-foot width of the building. Ground was broken for the project on Monday, October 20th, 1889. Some say that Mr. Lindsay's design principles were considered quite revolutionary. The Twin City Opera House's ground floor auditorium was uncommon in the late 1800s and is one of the last remaining theaters of its period with that feature. The stage floor is raked or sloped to allow the audience's front rows to see the performer's feet. The auditorium's central ceiling dome contributes to the theater's nearly perfect acoustics. Lines spoken from the rear of the stage can be heard perfectly throughout the room. The second floor of the Opera House would house the offices for the town government. The original plans for the Opera House Tower included a clock, but as the project began to run over budget, that plan had to be abandoned. Once again, partisan politics entered the project. The town council had requested funding from the state legislature to complete the town hall. According to newspaper accounts, a Republican contingent rushed to the State House and convinced the Assembly that the Democrat council was squandering money on the building. No more funds were approved for the McConnelsville Town Hall, and no clock was ever installed. Nearly 2½ years after ground was broken, the Town Hall and Opera House were completed. Because it had been such a politically charged issue, the Republican editor of the McConnelsville Herald commented one last time on the project upon its completion. He stated that the owl will be keeping an eye on the Democrat council. Before the GOP adopted the elephant as its symbol in the 20th century, the party had sometimes borrowed the owl from its ancestral Whig Party as its mascot. That owl still adorns the keystone in the archway over the Opera House doors. The formal opening of the Twin City Opera House was held Saturday, May 28, 1892. The opening was to be a grand affair. The program for the evening was the Arion Opera Company's performance of Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado. The cast, crew, and orchestra numbered nearly 100, and all of the seats in the auditorium were sold. Railway excursions had been arranged from neighboring towns to bring the cultured and the curious. Many of the ticket holders were not so much patrons of the opera, but curiosity seekers, eager to see what the newspapers described as the light of the day. The Opera House was one of the first buildings in the county to be lit by the electric light, and so its grand opening was to be even more significant and spectacular. But fate held an ironic twist. The local generating plant failed. The theater was plunged into darkness, and it took a great deal of last-minute effort to secure enough lamps to illuminate the hall. Before that was accomplished, however, many visitors had turned and headed back to their homes. So, the opening was not as grand as hoped. The newspapers reported that although the crowd was small, they were treated to a spectacular performance. Since the electricity was deemed unreliable, it was decided to go back and complete the installation of the gas and oil fixtures which had been called for in the original plans. Gas footlights were installed on the stage. A gas chandelier was hung in the dome and could be lit through small ports that were cut into the dome's perimeter. Over the years, the Opera House has accommodated an endless variety of performers and celebrities. Fire and brimstone evangelist Reverend Billy Sunday, William Jennings Bryan, and Senator Albert Beveridge spoke here. High school commencements and local minstrel shows were staged here, but most spectacular were the traveling shows. Often arriving by train, the traveling shows brought lavish productions to McConnelsville. Specially constructed doors at the rear of the stage allowed the loading and rigging of the enormous backdrops. Set pieces over 20 feet tall could be slid in through the narrow doors. Trap doors were cut into the stage floor so that as soon as the curtain closed, the doors opened and the actors dropped down a wooden slide to the dressing rooms below. This made the quick costume changes possible, and the frameworks for those trap doors are still visible under the stage. Also under the stage is the dramatic evidence of a potentially disastrous fire that occurred in the early 1900s. The ash pit for the coal furnace sat directly beneath the stage. The furnace had been cleaned and restoked for a play, so the pit was filled with still hot ash as the performance began. While the play was in progress, the heat from the ashes ignited the joists supporting the stage. The curtain was dropped and the orchestra in the pit began to play. The fire brigade coming in through the stage door extinguished the blaze, but not before a large hole was burned through the stage floor. The local legend says that the performance continued on half of the stage, and the Opera House narrowly avoided a tragedy. The basement of the Opera House hides other curiosities. The fan-shaped arrangements of the sloping joists beneath the auditorium were considered an ingenious solution when they were designed by the architect, Mr. Lindsay. Stories have persisted for decades about the Opera House tunnels. The tunnels were said to have linked the building that once stood on the Opera House foundation to other locations in the village and ultimately to the banks of the Muskingum River. But there is no historical evidence that this site, not the theater, was a station on the Underground Railroad. Another story says that after the theater was constructed, a tunnel leading across Main Street to the Kennebec Hotel was used by performers in traveling to and from their rooms. And what appears to be the tunnel's entrance is visible in the basement. The local folklore even goes so far as to explain that the tunnel was filled in during the 1930s out of a concern that the increasingly heavy traffic would cause a collapse. But again, there are no records or newspaper accounts of the tunnel being closed. There is no tunnel entrance in the basement of the old hotel. In fact, it is more likely that the opening in the basement wall was for an outside stairway entrance. The Opera House does have many secrets, and is reluctant to give them up. In the 1980s, while doing electrical renovations, workers discovered a hidden stairway leading from the second-floor mezzanine to the village offices on the first floor below. How long that stairway had been hidden, no one knows. In 1913, the Opera House was outfitted with a system for showing silent films. A projection booth was partitioned off in the back of the balcony, or gallery as it was known then, and a screen was added to the stage. The best seats in the house were those in the parquet circle, which are those in the front rows of the center section on the ground floor. Those premium seats could cost as much as 20 cents, while those in the peanut gallery were a nickel. The first sound pictures came to the Opera House in 1930, using the Bell Laboratory Vitaphone system. This cumbersome system involved synchronizing 78 RPM records with the film. The true talkies did not arrive in McConnelsville until 1936. The only time in its history that the Opera House briefly closed its doors to the public was for the installation of the sound projectors and the renovation of the auditorium. It was in 1936 that the old projection booth was removed from the balcony, and the present booth was constructed above the second-floor mezzanine, behind the balcony. The 500-plus seats that are still in use today were installed in 1936 at a cost of $6.70 per chair installed. The Twin City Opera House continues to screen recently released films as it has done nearly every weekend since 1936. The Opera House Auditorium was dedicated Birch Hall in honor and memory of MacDonald Birch, master magician. Birch was a Morgan County native and frequently entertained his hometown friends and relatives at the Opera House when he was not traveling the globe and entertaining before the crowned heads of the world. Birch was a contemporary of Thurston, Blackstone, and the great Harry Houdini. Birch's most lavish illusion was that of Princess, the disappearing pony. And what would a 120-year-old theater be without its resident spirits? At the Opera House, stories have persisted for decades about its apparitions. Some of the employees and visitors to the Opera House feel the building is home to the spirits of the theater's past. Many people believe the theater is the haunt of the ghost of Everett Miller. Miller was a longtime usher at the theater and was well recognized by the white suit that he always wore when working at the Opera House. There are dozens of stories of Opera House employees turning to catch a glimpse of a man in a shimmering white suit. Since 2006, several groups of ghost hunters have spent nights in the theater searching for evidence of the afterlife. The ghost hunters have recorded many examples of spirit voices, abnormal electromagnetic hotspots, and even photographic evidence that something shares the Opera House with its visitors. Today, the Twin City Opera House is owned and operated by the Opera House Incorporated, a nonprofit corporation established to preserve and restore this unique piece of Appalachian history. The members of the Opera House Incorporated, its employees and officers, invite you to enjoy our piece of living history, the Twin City Opera House.